the musical chairs of what I'll oh, the last thing I'm in that before I throw it away. But I did get 2 bags done complete, and then, like, some other pieces I've been adding. So, still trying to make progress, but, um, wanted to make sure that I came on with plenty enough time to read because I'm so excited about where this is going. Hmm, okay. The screen is like okay. We're on Alice day 4. Um, refreshing my memory yesterday. Okay. They were leading to what I don't know what it means, this word. Oh yeah, and then Louise was getting lucky with that Lee Towson or whatever. Okay. Oh yeah, they're still removing the paint too. It was anyway. When the word comes up again, if it does, then I'll ask you what it means because just not totally sure. All right, got my book, got my mutt. Let's go. She has been shipped back to Albany. Her parents, who have, during this ordeal, largely kept to their room, were the ones assigned to oversee her transport. Alice's parents? From Albany, they decamped to Manhattan with mumbled assurances that Barbara would be found. Now she is alone. She's out of everyone's hair this way, she thinks, and her shoulders shake a little with laughter. Today, like every day, is a very bad one. And so, with Dr. Lewis's blessing, she has been advised that she can take 3 pills when needed. She takes them now, her brain ahead of her body, sighing with relief when the pills come out of their home in the glass bottle. Anticipating the chemical surge, she chews them up to get there faster. She closes her eyes, her mind relaxes, bringing her unexpectedly back to the Dunwoody Institute. To her sister, Delphine, her only visitor the entire time she was there. I'm sorry, she said. And then she said more that she'd been in free fall since George died, that it had not been the first time with her and Peter, that they'd been intimate too when they were young, all the way back when she first introduced Alice to Peter for her coming out party. Was Alice to Peter simply a way for Delphine to stay close to him, setting him up with her guileless, stupid little sister, making Alice the broodmare while Delphine and Peter intellect matches carried on together every time Peter went down to New York? It's nothing like what you're imagining, said Delphine, reading her mind. George and I loved each other very, very much, but we were never interested in a traditional marriage. He was free to do as he pleased, as was I. I'm not sure if you'll recall this, but I tried to warn you of it once, said Delphine. She leaned back. About how you should have some fun, I said. Did you ever try it? Alice said nothing. It was wrong of us, Alice, all of us, said Delphine. We've treated you abominably. Silence. Will you leave him, Alice? Said Delphine. You could, you know. Silence. Alice, said Delphine. Alice, are you sleeping? At last, Alice smiled. In a way, she thought she was. She was having a waking dream, the same one she always had. In this dream, she was locked in a room she didn't recognize, while the search for her missing son went on without her, and someone, she didn't know who, was standing just outside the door. In Albany, Alice opens her eyes. She doesn't like being here by herself. The house is cold in summer, and all of Albany seems desolate, abandoned. The government workers are taking vacations in places further north or south. In this city, Alice feels somehow like the only survivor of a plague. 3 pills in her blood now. Her body goes slack. This is how she hears him best, on the other side of the veil, in the other world. This, the one where Bear lives. Once, while playing a game of dictionary, Alice came across the word non-secular. And this is the word that comes to mind when she thinks of the liminal space between life and death in which she encounters her son. See, how does she know the bear's dead? In which she lets herself acknowledge what she did is non-secular. The space in which she doesn't work so hard to stop the slivers of light and memory that come at her from time to time in unexpected moments, so sharply that she feels as if she's been stabbed, is non-secular. In this world, when those memories come, she accepts them, examines them impassively, opens herself instead of willing them away. Alice blinks now, coming back to life. Outside a window, the sun is going down. How long has she been sitting in one chair? She isn't certain. She stands up, goes to the toilet, relieves herself, and then she drifts in a dream toward the room that used to be a nursery, another non-secular space. I'm here now, she says. I'm here. She listens, awaiting his reply. Oh, hi. Daryl, John. Judita, day 4. I'm just thinking, like, obviously, it's looking like Alice did something, but what would she have done? Physically murdered him? I mean, really? She has seen dead bodies before. She has seen her own grandparents, 3 of them, in open caskets. She has seen the freshly deceased, victims of vehicle accidents during her tenure as a state trooper on highway patrol. She has never before seen skeletal remains. The medical, as the forest rangers with gloved hands, small intact skeleton from where it has rested for more than a decade onto a plank for observation. Out of respect for the dead, Jacob Slutter has already been led away by the armed guard. Now, a sort of impassive interest in the medical examiner's voice as he begins. I wondered, he says, whether the skeleton itself would have deteriorated, but it looks like the soil here isn't highly acidic, probably due to its proximity to water. He kneels down next to the plank, produces a measuring tape, holds it to various points in each bone. I'd say this was a child, he says, probably between 7 and 11 years of age. Do you know if it's male or female? Asked Hayes. In immature skeletons, there's room for error. the examiner, but right now I'd say male. Back at the command post, Denny Hayes holds his finger over a magnetic tape player, ready to listen to the recording of a phone call between Jacob Slutter and Judy, the one in which he directed them to the body of Bear Van Laer. A copy of the call has been made and transported from headquarters at Ray Brook, where Slutter is being held, to the Van Laer preserve. You believe him? Hayes says, before listening. You believe his story. Judy nods. She did. She does. Why? Hayes asks. He's a known liar. He's never admitted to anything before. Just my instinct, says Judy. He had no reason to help us out with this, but he did. Hayes presses play. Jacob Slutter begins to talk, his voice crackling. I know where Bear Van Laer is, says Slutter on the tape, but I didn't kill him. Judy, to day 5. All right, another day. At morning briefing, La Rochelle confirms it. The dental records are a perfect match. The skeleton was definitely Bear Van Laer's. Then he asks Hayes to give a summary of Jacob Slutter's story. Shouldn't investigator Luptak do that, says Hayes, being that she's the one he told? La Rochelle frowns. Whatever, he says. Somebody go. Reluctantly, Judy turns and trades places with Captain La Rochelle, walking to the front of the room while he walks to the back. There, he holds his gaze steady on Judy as she speaks. According to Jacob Slutter, the Van Laer Preserve is his ancestral land. The Slutter family, Dutch immigrants to Albany as far back as 1700, first settled in the North Country during the logging boom in the 1820s. A Slutter ancestor purchased the tract of land on which the Van Laer Preserve was later built. He and his sons logged the first growth forest clean, making a good living in the process. But in the 1870s, when politicians began to grow wary of what logging might do to the water supply downstate, threatened to ban it altogether within the future Adirondack Park, the Slutters sold their land. The man who bought it was, Judy allows herself only briefly to pause for dramatic effect, Peter Van Laer I, Bear and Barbara's great-grandfather. It is no coincidence, therefore, that each time Slutter is on the lam, he finds himself in this area. He says he's pulled to it. His own grandfather used to take him here when he was a boy, sneaking him onto property that was no longer theirs, pointing with resignation toward the grand house and camp as evidence that fortune favors some over others, that they, the Slutters, had always been cursed with bad timing and bad luck. Oh, thank you, Karen. The land had a secret, though, that even the Van Laers seemed not to know about. On Lake Jones' opposite shore, deemed impassable by most due to its steepness and rockiness, by the density of its trees, was a series of natural caverns. The Slutters had discovered them the first time the land had been logged, and the knowledge had been passed down through the generations. It was a place that Slutter's grandfather still took him to, a marvel one had to see to believe. According to Slutter, during his time on the run from the authorities in 1961, he sought refuge in these caverns for the length of that summer, when the homes he relied on in winter were occupied by their owners. It was the perfect spot, approachable only by water, hidden by thick trees, sheltered from the rain. He swam back and forth across the lake to reach his makeshift shelter. He fished and trapped and scavenged for food. One afternoon, said Slutter, he woke in his cavern to the sound of what he recognized as human footsteps. Oh, thank you again, Jerry. At first, he feared capture. The police, he knew, were on his trail, but to his ears it sounded as if only one man was approaching. And so, curious, he moved to the front of his cave, keeping close to the shadows to avoid being seen. Eventually, a man came into view. He was carrying something that Slutter couldn't see at first. Eventually, it was clear it was a child, a boy, lifeless in the man's arms. The man knelt to the ground, weeping. He laid the child before him and began to dig. Slutter, silent, 10 feet above them in his cavern, watched it all. Judy stops. For a moment, the room is quiet until someone asks the question she knows will be next. What did the man look like? Someone asks. And almost finally, and all the heads in the room swivel in the direction of Goldman, the oldest investigator who has called out from the back. Most of the description Slutter gave was generic, says Judy. Tall, brown hair, middle-aged. She pauses, considers her next words carefully. But he did say that the man looked like a local as opposed to someone in the family. Someone in the back speaks up. What did he mean by that? Something the man was wearing? He didn't explain, says Judy. Another hand goes up. Why didn't Slutter tell anyone after he was apprehended the first time? He thought no one would believe him, says Judy, that he wasn't the one who killed the boy in the first place. Later, when he heard about Bear's disappearance in the news, he put two and two together, figured out who the boy was, but he had no incentive to talk. A pause. Well, do we, asks Hayes, believe him? Judy does, but she won't say it out loud, not yet. Why did he tell us now? Someone asks. Hayes turns his gaze to Judy. Investigator Luptak, he says. Any thoughts? Judy clears her throat. Is she actually expected to answer? Go ahead, says Hayes. Well, says Judy, he said he trusted me. Someone in the room snorts. Someone coughs. All right, Hayes says. The whole story sounds implausible, correct, but there's one thing to acknowledge. The boy would be an outlier for Jacob Slutter. He's different from any of Slutter's other known victims. He's a sex predator, but his targets are women, grown women. Young boys have never been his interest that we know of, so let's work this theory for a little bit. Say Slutter didn't kill Bear Van Laer. Say he's telling the truth. Then who did? How did his body end up buried where it was buried? La Rochelle in the back says, why not Carl Stoddard? He was a local. If what Slutter is saying is true, he'd fit the profile. Hayes pauses, diplomatic. Maybe, yes, he says, but I think it's worth looking into other ideas at this point, sir. Such as, says La Rochelle, testy. For a moment, everyone is silent. Then Hayes says, has the family been notified, sir, of Bear's discovery? La Rochelle looks away. They have. May I ask how they reacted? La Rochelle frowns. I spoke only to Bear's father. He received the news, stoically, I would say. He's gone back to Albany for the present to relay the information to his wife in person. He looks distracted. Then, abruptly, he straightens. Excuse me, he says, and walks out of the cabin, tapping a pack of cigarettes into his palm as he goes. Hayes catches Judy's eye. The case will be reopened. Everyone knows it, including La Rochelle. After La Rochelle's departure, Hayes turns to face the investigators left in the room. Here's what I don't understand, he says. Why didn't any of the searchers see it? A new patch of disturbed earth just across the lake, marked with a cairn. That's the word, C-A-I-R-N, cairn. I don't know what that is, no less. Huge crew of people on site for weeks. You'd think they would have searched the periphery of the lake first thing. Maybe they were misdirected, says Judy. Hayes looks at her. By the family, I guess, says Judy. Then she turns to investigator Goldman. Was that the sense you got when you were working the case? Goldman hesitates, looks down. I did always have the strange sense that they didn't want to find him, yes. You think someone in the family killed him? Hayes asks. But this apparently isn't a claim Goldman is prepared to make. He goes silent. What if it was an accident? Judy says. Then why let Carl Stoddard take the fall? More than that, Why actively indict him? Hayes says. Judy looks around, pausing to see if anyone else will chime in, but for a moment there's silence. How did Carl's daughter die? Someone asks. Heart attack, Goldman says. He had a heart attack and died while in police custody, awaiting questioning. Judy is forming a theory. What if it was convenience, says Judy. What if it was easier for the family to let everyone think it was Stoddard who did it? He was dead after all, she said. They probably thought they weren't hurting anyone. All right, says Hayes, maybe, but that would still mean they had something to cover up. Silence. Which was, says Goldman. Judy is looking at something on the wall. Judy, says Hayes. Investigator Goldman, says Judy. Who was the person running the search for Bear? Well, the family was, says Goldman. No, says Judy. The person providing direction, the person actually overseeing the search. Goldman looks down at the floor, thinking. Then he looks up. I think it was the former camp director, actually, he says. The father of the current one. Vic Hewitt was his name. For a moment, Judy goes silent. Then she walks down the hallway toward the bedroom she now knows to be Vic's. When she returns, she proffers the group photo she found to Denny Hayes. Look, she says, pointing to the pencil on the back. Black Fly, Goodbye, 1961. She flips it again to its front side. Look again. A small group of investigators gathers around, looking at the photo. Everyone in the picture is formally attired, children and adults alike in dresses and suits. The women wear small hats, even in black and white. She can see their lipstick and mascara. Only two people stand off to one side, dressed differently. TJ, a young teenager, and her father, Vic, middle-aged, bearded, wearing a fishing hat with a floppy brim and a plaid shirt rolled at the elbows and corduroys patched at the knee. Judy puts a finger to the girl. That's TJ Hewitt, she says. Right. Doesn't it look like her? Hayes nods. Which makes him, says Judy, and Hayes says, Vic Hewitt. She moves her finger back toward the larger group. I describe them as summer people, she said, based on their clothes. But how would you describe Vic? Hayes looks at her. A local, he says. He turns to an investigator, hands him the photograph. Take this to Jacob Slutter, he says. Ask him if he recognizes anyone in this photograph as the man who buried Bear Van Laer. A knock at the door interrupts them. Anna, the conservator, stands blinking in the bright sunlight, exhausted. La Rochelle stands behind her. Anna, Judy asks her. No, I got excited. She turns and walks in the direction of the main house. Judy glances over her shoulder at Hayes, who glances at La Rochelle. Then the three of them follow her, trotting to keep up with Anna's long strides. With both Van Laer parents back in Albany and most of the guests now gone, the house is almost empty. Together, Judy and Anna walk to the pink room. Inside, the exposed mural is in plain sight. Judy's first reaction is to be surprised at the quality of the artistry. Barbara Van Laer could paint, that's certain. The wall is covered with a set of icons Judy doesn't understand. Safety pins and flags, and odd-looking faces with odder-looking haircuts. Music notes abound as well. A river makes its way from the upper left-hand corner of the wall to its lower right-hand corner. Judy takes the whole thing in, scanning it rapidly to see if anything catches her eye. Do you see it yet? Says Anna. Judy's heartbeat quickens. See what? Says Captain La Rochelle, his head moving in quick circles as he takes the whole wall in. I don't blame you, says Anna. The whole thing is overwhelming, but come closer. She walks to the river. Its waves, she realizes, are not just waves, they're letters. BVL plus JPM, they spell. The way that children for decades or centuries have memorialized their love. Barbara Van Laer plus John Paul McClellan, Hayes says. He's asked for the director's cabin to be cleared. As senior investigator, he has that authority. Now, Judy sits opposite him in a folding chair, elbows on knees, gaze on ground. I think that'll hold up as solid evidence, says Hayes. With any judge, we'll start the process of getting a warrant for his arrest. The only question now is where he stowed the girl. That's not the only question, says Judy. Oh, the other one is, did Vic Hewitt kill her brother Bear? Hayes looks at her. Then he slaps his knees and stands up. That's your assignment, Judy, he says. Forget the grandfather for now. Forget Jacob Slutter. I'm on the lead desk, and that's the lead I assign you. In the meantime, I'm driving down to the hotel McClellan's staying in myself. I don't trust these troopers to keep good tabs on him. Man, that John Paul McClellan really got around. He had that Louise. Didn't they say he was with Annabelle? Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he was with any of the wives, too, at this rate. Judita, day 5. A cairn is the small stack of rocks marking the grave. Oh. Oh. Well, I did not know that word. Thank you. She spends hours looking for any sign of either Hewitt. She goes back to staff quarters. She searches the commissary where TJ must be eating to see if she can find her there. She asks the staff up at the main house. No one has seen her. It seems to know her well enough to speculate about where she might have gone. Either that, thinks Judy, or they're not talking. At 4 p.m., just before the end of her shift, Judy is seated outside the director's cabin, gazing at the lake, when the sound of a vehicle draws her attention. It's TJ Hewitt in her truck. She drives by without turning her head in Judy's direction, pulls to a stop out front of staff quarters 100 yards away. Judy watches as TJ brings a bag out of the vehicle, then lets herself into the building. Judy follows. Inside, she finds the padlock on the door unlocked and the door standing open. She knocks anyway. TJ inside jumps. Sorry to startle you, says Judy. You didn't, says TJ. Have a minute? For you? Says TJ. Sure. She smiles, and Judy is momentarily disarmed. Then she gathers herself and walks over the threshold of the room. What's going on? Says TJ. How come you didn't tell me your father was alive? Says Judy. Didn't I? No. You talked about him as if he was dead. TJ sits down on the edge of her small bed. Well, she says, I guess that's what it feels like. He's not himself these days. Judy nods, remains standing. Where is he now? She says. With family. With family. TJ nods. Why? You needed to use our house as your headquarters, says TJ. I didn't have a better place for him to go. He needs to be looked after all the time. Judy glances back into the hallway. A lot of empty rooms in this building, she says. But TJ is shaking her head. You don't understand, she says. He's not familiar with this place. He'd wander off. He needs to be watched. TJ looks out the window. What family is he staying with? What? Oh, says TJ, with his brother. His brother? Yes, says TJ. For a moment, silence. Then Judy takes out her card, hands it over. Miss Hewitt, TJ, she says. I don't know why, but I have the feeling that you're not telling me the whole truth. If you want to, you can call me anytime. Judita, night 5. Judy can't sleep. She lies in her room at the inn, turning one way and then the other. She turns on the television and then turns it off. She ruminates on the facts of the day. Vic Hewitt, TJ Hewitt, the results from the analysis of the blood on the uniform in McClellan's car, type A positive, a match for Barbara Van Laer, though not definitive proof. An hour goes by, another. It takes her until midnight to realize she's never had dinner. Defeated, she rises from her bed, pulls her wrinkled suit back on, and extracts several quarters from her wallet, then walks under the portico toward the main building of the inn, where she'll get something from the vending machines. The front door is unlocked, but the desk is empty. Under the fluorescent lights of the lobby, Judy inspects her choices. She'll get a Milky Way bar, she decides, her mother's favorite, but when she makes her selection, the bar gets stuck against the glass on its way down. Judy curses, kicks the machine once, twice, 3 times. With her hand, she pounds on the glass. "Miss," someone says, and Judy spins, panting. It's Bob Alcott, the owner of the inn. "I'm sorry," says Judy, twice. "Did I wake you?" No, says Mr. Alcott. "I was up anyway." He's fumbling for something in his pocket, and she sees that it's a set of keys. He takes the smallest one out, inserts it into the vending machine, and opens the door. Immediately, the Milky Way falls to the ground. Judy stoops to retrieve it, feeling foolish. "Take another," says Mr. Alcott. "Take whatever you want." "That's all right," says Judy, but already Mr. Alcott is silently collecting a small assortment of candy and snacks from the machine. "Here," he says, "least I can do." Then he closes it and locks the door. Judy regards him. "Mr. Alcott," she says, "you're a history teacher, right?" He nods. "How much do you know about the history of the Van Laer Preserve?" "Oh," says Mr. Alcott, "just about everything there is to know." He straightens as he says it. This, Judy understands, is his life's work. "Miss Leftak, would you like to come up for a cup of tea?" says Bob Alcott, "to go with your Milky Way bar?" "Won't it disturb your wife?" Judy says, and the man shakes his head. "Oh no, she's up too. We're both night owls now that the kids are grown." "That's very kind of you," says Judy. Then she excuses herself briefly to retrieve her notepad from her room. In the Alcott's apartment, just off the lobby, the couple sits across from Judy at a table. Ah, thank you, Rob. See, I'm gonna have to look closer. What is this? Okay, it's a teacher. Because I see a chalkboard. Terry, a man after your own heart. Judy lets her pen hover for a moment over the paper before her. Then she dives in. "Mr. and Miss Alcott," she says. "Here's my first question. Do you know when the Hewitts came to live on the preserve?" "Oh," says Mr. Alcott, "that's easy. Same time as the Van Laers. In fact, it was the Hewitts who guided them to the land. Dan Hewitt was Vic's father. He was born into a guiding family about an hour north, up near Saranac Lake. The first Peter Van Laer made his acquaintance when he was scouting land for his estate. It was Dan who knew about a piece of land a bit farther south that a family of loggers was looking to sell. He pointed Peter the first in that direction." "What family was that?" asked Judy. "The ones who sold it to the Van Laers, you mean?" She nods. "Funny you ask," says Mr. Alcott. "It was a family called Slutter. You might have heard of their son." "Yeah," says Judy, "I have." Anyway, Peter Van Laer, the first one, took such a shine to the land that he felt indebted to Dan Hewitt, brought him along to what became the Van Laers Preserve to serve as the family's personal guide. Alcott stops, sips his tea. A decade went by. The first Peter Van Laer met and married his wife, and together they had a son, the second Peter, still alive today. Dan Hewitt, too, met a woman called Clara, who gave him twin boys. But Clara didn't live long after that, according to my research. So the boys were raised by their father until they were about 15, which is when he died too. they became orphans, living on the land of the Van Laer Preserve. Mr. Van Laer the first was the one cabin they'd been living in right into the with the Van Laers during the year. Considers this. What was the age difference, she asked, between Peter II and the Hewitt boys? Were they older than him or younger? Only a handful of years younger, says Mr. Alcott. 6, I think, says his wife. 6 years. And the rumor in town was that Peter II never liked the Hewitt boys. His father favored them on daily walks, gave them the run of the place. He was kind to Charlie Hewitt, always spoke well of him, but it was Vic he really loved, treated him like another son, adopted him, basically, though that was never made official. In theory, Mr. Alcott continues, the Hewitt boys should have been like brothers to Peter II, but he was jealous, I think. Still is, maybe. Judy is writing as fast as she can. Still, it's not fast enough. Mr. Alcott notices and pauses. Camp Emerson was Vic's idea, says Mr. Alcott. When Judy looks up again, he was the one did all the work for it, but Peter I supported it from the start. By the end of his life, he described it as his greatest accomplishment. He saw it as a way to teach generations of children about the importance of the land. He never gave a damn about the money he made banking. Always seemed surprised by how much he had, in my opinion. He used to come into Shattuck and greet everyone by name. He was different from his offspring, more like a Hewitt than a Van Laer, if you ask me, because the rest of his family always saw Camp Emerson as a folly. They wanted nothing to do with it. Still don't. Miss Alcott stands, puts the kettle on again. The problems between the Hewitts and the Van Laers began when Peter I died. I hate to gossip, but I'm telling you honestly that I have no way to know, but the rumor is that Peter I left Camp Emerson and its operations entirely to Vic Hewitt, divided the preserve in half. The main house and the farm would go to the Van Laers, the camp to the Hewitts. In theory, it was a plan that might have worked, but, he says, but he made a mistake. He made his own son, Peter II, the trustee of his will, thus granting him the power to distribute funds for the camp as he saw fit until his death. And after he dies, says Judy, then the camp will go to Vic, says Mr. Alcott, or more likely to his daughter, Tessie Jo. The kettle whistles. Judy looks up. But, as I said, says Mr. Alcott, this is all rumor, speculation, which, as a history teacher, I should know better than to propagate. I understand, says Judy. I'll look into it myself. She stands, thanks Miss Alcott for the tea. At the door, she turns back. I do have another question, she says. Go ahead. Vic Hewitt's brother, she says, Charlie. What happened to him? Oh, he died a decade ago at least, says Mr. Alcott. 2 decades ago, says Miss Alcott. 2 decades ago, before Bear disappeared. That's right. How did he die? Natural causes, says Mr. Alcott. Nothing suspicious. What did he do on the preserve? Mr. Alcott frowns. Now, I have to think about that, he says. He puts his head down as if trying hard to remember. I guess, if I'm remembering right, I think he ran the farm. I think he oversaw the farm that supplied the main house with all its provisions back in the day. And he lived, says Judy, though she already knows how he will answer. Where is he staying? She'd asked TJ, and TJ had said with his brother. He lived above the slaughterhouse, says Mr. Alcott, in a little apartment up there. That's if I'm remembering right, says Mr. Alcott again. Judy thanks him, walks back toward her room to get her car keys and her gun. Within 5 minutes, she's driving, headlights pointed north toward the preserve. Judita, night 5. She's never been on these grounds except in daylight. Now the moon lends the long dirt driveway a different aspect. The pines on either side of it stretch like giants toward the sky, the farm buildings in the glow cast by her headlights looking even more decrepit and decayed. Judy pulls to the side of the driveway, cuts her engine, cuts her headlights too. She sits for a moment in the vast dark of the preserve, letting her eyes adjust. This is the month of the Perseid meteor shower in the Adirondacks. The sky is bright with stars. She opens and closes the door to her Beetle as gently as she can, opens the trunk to retrieve the flashlight from her emergency kit. Then, holding her flashlight forward, she walks toward the slaughterhouse. She approaches it the way she used to dive into cold water as a child, quickly, confidently, without thinking too much. If she stops and considers her actions, she knows she might falter. Inside, she walks straight into the back, where a staircase rises toward the second floor. She ascends. The beam of the flashlight trembles slightly in her hand. Halfway up, she pauses. She hears something, voices, maybe, a man's voice, and then, suddenly, music. She can't make out the lyrics, but the music itself is old-fashioned, something she believes her grandparents might have listened to. She continues up the stairs. At the top, in the beam of her flashlight, she sees a closed door. It's held shut by a hasp and a padlock, the same kind she noticed on T.J. Hewitt's room in the staff quarters building. She hesitates for a moment, and then, carefully, she draws her gun. With her other hand, she raps at the door. Mr. Hewitt, she says, are you in there? The radio goes off. Mr. Hewitt, she calls. My name is Investigator Judita Luptak. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Silence. Mr. Hewitt, says Judy. She feels so close to the truth, her heartbeat quickens. Mr. She begins, and then at last she hears him. Barbara? He says. Judy shivers a little. No, Mr. Hewitt, she says. My name is Judita. She begins, but Vic Hewitt cuts her off. Barbara, he says, you're not supposed to be here. Mr. Hewitt calls Judy. I'm not Barbara. Is Barbara inside with you? Silence. Mr. Hewitt. She feels the weight of the gun in her hands, considers her options. She could retreat, could walk or drive up to the command post, could bring yet another fleet of troopers to the structure, could risk being seen as a fool yet again. Instead, she says, Mr. Hewitt, stand back from the door. She aims her pistol sideways at the padlock, ensuring that the bullet won't make its way through the door. She braces her arm, fires. The padlock falls with a clunk to the floor, and Judy opens the door. Inside, a sparsely furnished room, an old man lies in a twin bed. A blanket covers him from his chin to his feet. His body is small, his expression confused. Who? He says, over and over again. Instantly, Judy feels guilty. I'm not here to harm you, she says. I just need to ask you some questions. But Vic Hewitt only lets out a series of sounds that Judy can't comprehend, and at last, she recognizes that she's in a situation she can't get out of. With the padlock broken, she has no way to lock the door again. With the state this man is in, she has no way to bring him outside, and she has no way to bring others to him either without leaving him alone. Judy looks straight down at the ground between her feet. Maybe, she thinks, this wasn't the right line of work for her, after all. Maybe she would have been better off remaining a trooper. Then, from the bed, there is movement. Oh, says Vic Hewitt. Oh, I guess you're here about Bear. His voice is remorseful, but also younger, more energetic, as if he is returning in his mind to another time in his life. Judy hesitates. She isn't certain whether statements from those with infirm minds the terms she learned at the academy are admissible in court, but her own personal curiosity in this situation wins. Yes, she says, I'm afraid I'm here about Bear. Vic Hewitt is struggling now to sit up in bed. Judy bends down, places a hand on his back, helps him, then sits on the edge of his bed, upright now. Hewitt gazes directly at her, and she sees his eyes are filled with tears. I only helped, he says. I only helped. You didn't kill him, Judy asks. Kill him? God, no, says Vic Hewitt. Who did? Judy says. And then, from outside the door, the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Judy goes quiet, draws her gun, walks swiftly toward the wall next to the threshold, and puts her back to it. Oh no, says Hewitt. Oh no. The person stops outside the door. Judy can hear breathing. She will fire this gun, she tells herself, only if necessary. At last, T.J. Hewitt takes one step into the room, looking in Judy's direction already, as if she knows who will be there. She looks Judy up and down, looks directly at her gun. I've got one of those too, she says mildly, but I don't draw it on people. Lie down, Judy says, and then she adds, please. TJ sighs, takes her time. She gets down on her knees, looking up at Judy, all the while as if demonstrating the ridiculousness of the exercise, then lowers herself in a slow push-up to the ground. Judy, gun still drawn, pats her down. All right, listen, she says. You and I are going to walk toward the command post together. Toward my house, you mean, says TJ. Sure. Well, that won't work. Why? I can't leave my dad here. He wanders. That door has to be locked. Judy sighs, exasperated. Can he come with us? TJ gives a half laugh. Hardly. Look at him. I had to carry him up the stairs to get him here. For a moment, Judy and TJ look at each other. Then TJ says, tie us up. Judy blinks. With what? There's rope downstairs, all kinds of stuff. Tie us up. I'll help you. She hesitates. It feels like a trap, and yet there's no other option in Judy's mind that doesn't involve leaving at least one of the Hewitts alone. And so she does it. She follows TJ down into the slaughterhouse and then around the side of it toward another building. TJ calls the granary, and from here they extract the rope, and back upstairs in the little apartment above the slaughterhouse, Judy ties the Hewitts together, back to back on Vic Hewitt's bed. Then she ties the rope itself to the bed frame. 15 minutes later, she returns with 4 investigators and 5 state troopers. 30 minutes later, she is sitting in the passenger seat of a patrol car. The Hewitts are in the back. Oh, we get Victor, 1961. In the director's cabin, Vic was speaking with a recalcitrant 12-year-old boy, a child who had been shunned by his peers and had recently converted his embarrassment at this development into physical aggression. In the middle of their conversation, the boy had stopped suddenly to point through a nearby window. What is it? Said Vic, turning. Something's in the lake, said the boy, his tone changing from bitter to unsettled. Sure enough, in the middle of Lake Joan was a white-bellied object that at first looked like a surfacing whale. Vic stood and walked to the window. It was a rowboat, capsized. Stay here, said Victor. Don't get up out of that chair. Outside, Vic broke into a run. A bad thunderstorm had just come through, sending counselors and campers inside, and the grass was slick with new rain. He stumbled once, fell to his knees, then stood again. The grounds felt empty. He swung his head around, but saw no human forms. Even up the hill at Self-Reliance, it was quiet. For the first time in a week, it seemed. The Van Layers had been having their annual party on the grounds, to which Victor, who used to be included, when Peter the First was alive, had not been invited in years. Upon reaching the beach, Vic stood with his hands on his hips, observing the upside-down boat. One of the guests up at the main house, he thought, someone had capsized it and then left it to sink. They were always pulling stunts like this, drunken antics that resulted in more work for everyone else on the grounds. He scanned the shores, looking for movement, seeing none. Then, sighing, he turned and jogged up the hill toward Self-Reliance. The thought occurred to him that he had not set eyes on Tessie Joe since morning. Normally, this wouldn't have concerned him overmuch. All summer, she was given free rein to run about the grounds, usually with Bear on her heels. Her relationship with the Van Layers was different from her father's. They accepted her as a playmate for Bear, as someone who could keep an eye on their adventurous son. She went freely in and out of Self-Reliance with the boy. Victor, meanwhile, avoided the house entirely. Now he steeled himself and squared his shoulders and knocked at the front door of the Van Layers' house. It opened immediately. On the other side was Peter II, Bear's grandfather, who looked as if he'd been standing guard. His face was stiff and pallid. His hair was wet. "Everything all right?" said Victor. "I saw a boat." Peter II grabbed his shoulders swiftly, manhandled him away from the threshold. The black fly door knocker clanked once in their wake as the door closed. "Follow me," Peter II commanded. His voice was low and urgent. "I need to find my daughter," said Victor. "I need to make sure she's all right." "She's fine," said Peter II. "Bear's not." Victor looked at the man, his nominal brother, his enemy. At that moment, Peter II's entire face was trembling slightly, his mouth downturned, his eyes bulging in what looked like an effort to not to shout or faint or cry. He set off toward the boathouse. Wordlessly, Vic followed. Halfway there, he heard a noise that stopped him in his tracks. He listened, alert, his whole body still. A fox, he thought. He'd heard that sound in the night, an eerie, throttled cry that raised the hair on his neck. But foxes were nocturnal. This was no animal. It was, he realized at last, the sound of a woman wailing. Victor, 1961. Together, the two men stood in the threshold of the boathouse, looking out toward the lake and the sinking, upturned boat. Peter II had been the one to find Alice after her embarrassing entrance into the great room, after his attempt to divert the boy from voting with his obviously incapacitated mother. Peter II had gone outside to where he told his grandson to meet him for a hike and found him absent. Thinking at first that he might have gone ahead toward Hunt Mountain, Peter II had walked in that direction a while until the rain began in earnest, at which point a terrible thought occurred to him. The boy would not be at the trailhead. He would be at the lake with his mother. He was devoted to her. He would have noticed her distress when she stumbled into the crowded great room and issued him the invitation to go boating. At which point I ran, said Peter II to Vic Hewitt. His face, as he looked toward the lake, was still. His formality would not waver, even in that moment. When he reached the boathouse, the storm was receding, and there before him, climbing up the ramp, a terrible vision. Alice, waterlogged, hysterical, screaming incomprehensibly. In the far distance, the rowboat overturned. "Where's Bear?" he said to her, urgently, but she made no noises he could understand, only pointed in the direction of the water, doubled over as if in physical pain. He had scanned the water and the shore, just as he was doing now. He hadn't seen Bear. "I sat Alice down," said Peter II. "I commanded her to be still. Then I dove in." He was hoping, he said, to find the boy alive under the hull of the boat. He was praying for this. But when he reached the rowboat and dove under, he was met with a terrible sight. His grandson, lifeless, his clothing hooked to the oarlock. I pulled him to shore, said Peter II. He had no pulse. Did you breathe into his mouth? Vic wanted to ask. Did you pump his chest? It was a technique his father had taught him, that his grandfather had taught his father. To ask these questions aloud felt cruel, and so Victor was silent. Peter was too, for a while. Neither spoke. Peter II cleared his throat several times in a row, and Victor turned to him. This man he had known since birth. Peter I had told Vic on his deathbed that he hoped they would come to see one another as brothers. But for all these years of acquaintance, he never once felt any sympathetic impulse for the man until now. Tentatively, Vic put one hand on his shoulder. The look that Peter II cast in his direction, imperious, appalled, made him withdraw quickly. Alice can't know, said Peter II after a short pause. Peter's with her now, trying to keep her calm, but we have both decided that she can't know what happened. Vic furrowed his brow. Where is she? In one of the farm buildings, I think, said Peter II, in your brother's old apartment, far enough away that she won't be heard. This didn't seem right or useful, but it was not, he knew, Alice's well-being that concerned them. It was theirs and the bank's. To have their name in the papers for anything other than success was anathema to the Peters, and a scandal like this one, Bear's mother, drunk, taking her son out boating in a storm, something that would affect their business, shake the confidence of their clients in the entire enterprise, well, they wouldn't let it happen. That much was obvious. A long silence ensued until Peter II said, Look. He pointed in the direction of the rowboat. Only the faintest trace of it was visible now, the seam of its white belly facing up toward the clearing sky. Together they watched as it sank beneath the water. Then it was gone. Before Victor lay two clear paths. One was to disagree with the Peters. He could tell them that he would not lie. He could say to them that an untruth as large as this one would have consequences they couldn't foresee. His own father had taught him that this well when he was learning to guide. In the woods, each decision you make is irreversible and sometimes catastrophic. A forgotten compass, a wrong turn, a fire lit in defiance of a drought. He could tell them he would not stand for it and leave. But in the process, he would lose the trust of the overseer of his inheritance, lose the camp, his livelihood. If Victor were deciding for himself alone, this was the path he would go down, surely. He reassured himself of this, nodding once, as if to seal the thought inside him. But he wasn't deciding only for himself. There was Tessie Jo to think of, too, his daughter, who loved the land as much as he did, whose unusual demeanor and appearance and comportment had already drawn stares in town. With the camp, her future was secure. She would never be required to marry, not if she didn't want to. She could live without restriction what he thought of as an unconventional life. Every choice would be open to her. This was what he told himself as he took one step down the other path that lay before him. To hide the truth at the command of the Van Layers. How can I help you? Said Victor. He thought of his own father, holding a compass in his hand, watching its needle wobble, and then calm. Victor, 1961. Together, they lifted Bear's body from its place on the floor of the boathouse and into the bottom of a red canoe. Vic stood guard while Peter II walked up to the slaughterhouse to switch places with his son. Then Peter III came, white-faced, and asked for a moment alone. Outside the boathouse, Vic froze. From inside came the muffled sounds of a grown man crying, trying not to be overheard. 5 minutes passed, 10, and then Peter the Third emerged, red-faced and red-eyed, looking straight ahead, away from Victor. Do what you must, he said, and then he walked away. Vic pushed the canoe into the lake. In its belly, beneath a blanket, was the body of Bear Van Laer, next to it, a shovel. He sat in the stern, keeping his eyes ahead, trying hard not to look down at the small figure he was ferrying across the water to a permanent repose. When he did, it was not revulsion that he felt, or fear, but tenderness. He too had loved the boy. As gently as he could, he moored the boat on a rocky bank on the opposite side of Lake Joan. He lifted Bear's small, strong body from the boat. It was so strange to see it still. The boy had been in motion always, from the time he could walk, Tessie Joe's shadow, following her wherever she went. Vic took the shovel from the boat, cradled the boy in his arms. 30 feet inland, he laid the boy down at the front of a sheer face of rock and began to dig. At Self-Reliance, he knew that Peters would be making the announcement to the guests, who would be rising lazily from an afternoon nap or looking up from the books they had brought out when it became clear that the storm would keep everyone inside. We need your help, they would say. Earlier, Bear went for a walk with his grandfather. Now it seems as if he might be lost. This was the plan they created while, above the slaughterhouse, Alice Van Laer slept, stupefied by a dose of Valium that bordered on dangerous. Vic Hewitt is already scouting the area, they'd say, in case anyone saw him out in the canoe. We're calling the fire department now, they'd say. Victor's face betrayed his doubt. It would work, the Peters insisted. Now, with Bear safely inside the ground, Vic bade him farewell and began the work of filling in the hole. When he was finished, he began to walk away and then thought better of it. He gathered a cache of stones. He built a cairn. He'd visit the boy from time to time. He'd bring Tessie Joe too when she was old enough. For now, she would not have to know the truth. Victor, 1961. What he didn't count on was that Tessie Joe would have seen. Her absence that day made him assume that she was busying herself someplace, finishing one of her projects elsewhere on the grounds, and he was glad for it, glad he would not have to explain things to her while she was still so young. There would be time for that eventually, he thought. But then, after the firefighters arrived, after he had persuaded them to wait until morning to begin their search in earnest, Tessie Joe had come tearing out of the forest, her mouth wide, her face white, her long braid damp. He had managed to corral her before she could speak. He had managed to hustle her down a hallway. Tessie Joe, he had said, when they were alone, what is it? She had seen the overturned rowboat. Her curiosity had brought her to the south side of the boathouse. From there, she overheard her father speaking with the Peters, had overheard what the Peters wanted to do. From there, she saw her own father row the red canoe to the other side of the lake, and she saw him return from it too. She knew what they had done. Now, as Vic made his request of her to stay silent forever about what she had seen, to join him and the Peters in their great untruth, she looked back at him. Her large eyes narrowed, her eyebrows furrowed. Her doubt made him doubtful too, but a girl of her age couldn't understand her own future the way he did. She couldn't understand how limited her opportunities would be if they defied the Peters, told the truth. Their future rested upon this lie. Trust me, said Victor. Reluctantly, his daughter nodded. Victor, 1961. His assignment overnight was to keep watch over Miss Van Laer in her temporary residence above the slaughterhouse. It was important to keep her apart from the other guests, said the Peters, until she could be calmed. At 2 a.m, Miss Van Laer was asleep again. Finally, it had taken 4 pills, the most they had authorized him to dispense at one time. On a little chair, he sat across from her, watching her. He didn't dislike Miss Van Laer, though she had never been particularly kind to him. He found her to be pitiable, someone the Peters had identified as useful. This was also, no doubt, the way they thought of him when they didn't think of him as burdensome. When Miss Van Laer was finally permitted to be conscious, whenever the Peters deemed it safe, she would be broken beyond repair to learn the truth of what had transpired that afternoon, what she had done. Each time she woke in between doses, Miss Van Laer asked the same question, increasingly desperate. Where's Bear? Over and over she asked it, the words blurry in their edges. For anyone else, it might have been difficult to understand what she was saying, but Victor knew. They were the same words she asked him daily whenever she ran into him on the ground. Where's Bear? She asked him anew, and again he spoke the line he was told to speak. He went for a walk with his grandfather. We'll find him soon. But the boat, she said. There was no boat. That was a dream. Again and again the same exchange. Then she would be quiet until, where's Bear? This was the question she would ask for the rest of her life, seeking her son without end, in keeping the truth from her, Victor thought, the truth that they told him she could not abide, that they insisted would send her to an early grave. The Peters were simply taking away the grief of loss and replacing it with the grief of uncertainty. This, he realized, was the very thing from which he was attempting to protect his own daughter. He believed on most levels that he had little to give her without the Van Laers, and so he bent to their collective will, telling himself that, at least in doing so, he was giving his strange and wonderful daughter the certainty of meaningful work, an income, freedom from the sort of life the Van Laer women had been assigned at birth. Next to him, Miss Van Laer now moaned softly in her sleep. A thin film of sweat dotted her brow. He opened a dresser drawer, took out a towel. Gently, he placed it to her head. In the morning, he would face a larger crowd of searchers. He would tell them the same story he had told the firefighters and his daughter and himself. Bear went for a walk with his grandfather. He turned back for a pocket knife. He was not seen again. Alice, 1961. Each time she surfaced from sleep, she was greeted by the same set of images. Bear opening the boathouse door, and then the boat on the water, the oncoming storm, the darkening sky. The face of her son as he sat in the bow of the boat, smiling tightly, his small brow furrowed while she rowed. How he'd look toward the shore, and then the sky, and then his mother, seeking her reassurance at the first clap of thunder. The rain came on so quickly that she could see it moving toward them like a curtain, east to west across the lake. When it reached them, it had filled their boat. She tried to bail with her hands. She clawed at the water. The boat tipped, and the two of them spilled out. The far gunwale came crashing down with a slap on something hard, a human form, and she shouted the name of her son. Judita, day 6. She'll sign a statement, says Hayes. She will, says Judy. They're standing outside an interrogation room at Raybrook, the same one in which Judy first met Jacob Slutter. On the other side of the mirrored window, they watch T.J. Hewitt, who sits as still as stone, both hands on the table before her. You know what she told me, says Judy. That time I heard noises up above the slaughterhouse? She says that was them, the Hewitts. That when I left, TJ hustled the two of them off the property, knowing that I'd return with backup. So when the troopers climbed upstairs, she says it looked empty. Right. Thing I don't get, says Hayes, is why she chose this moment to confess. Why keep the secret for 14 years only to give it up now? I've got a theory about that. I bet you do. They pause, watching TJ, who closes her eyes for such a long time that Judy wonders if she's asleep. Then she opens them. I think she was afraid. The Van Layers were right on the cusp of framing an innocent person again, just like they did with Carl Stoddard. Hayes turns to her, frowning. McClellan, he says? She thinks McClellan's innocent? No, says Judy. She thinks he did it, but McClellan Jr. is the Van Layer's godson. He'll take over the bank someday, according to his sister. Since the Van Layers have no son, and McClellan Sr. has a lot of sway over the family and the bank, TJ was afraid the McClellans would convince the family that Louise Donahue was the culprit. Hayes pauses. So the Hewitts came forward to save Louise Donahue's reputation and Carl Stoddard's all these years later. Hayes nods. Never too late, I guess, he says. Together, they watch as TJ Hewitt turns her face toward the one window in the interrogation room. It's too high to give any view of the buildings outside, or even of the trees, but still she searches it, her eyes moving rapidly. She breathes deeply, face turned toward the bright sky. What will she do now? Wonders Judy. If the Hewitts lose the camp, if the Van Layers cut them out entirely, as they'll no doubt do, snapping the thin thread that was stretched for decades between the Hewitts and Peter the First. And she answers her question herself. They'll be fine. The Hewitts, like Judy, like Louise Donahue, like Denny Hayes, even, don't need to rely on anyone but themselves. It's the Van Layers and families like them who have always depended on others. Judita, day 6. Technically, her shift is over, but now that she no longer has to answer to her parents each night, Judy can stay as long as she likes until her work is done. Hayes, on the other hand, has to get home to his family. Before he leaves, he claps her on the shoulder. Good work, he says. I mean it. In the wake of the Hewitts' revelation about the Van Layers, investigator Goldman is on his way to obtain arrest warrants for both Van Layer men, Peter's second and third, and also for John Paul McClellan Sr., on charges of criminal conspiracy for their role in lying to the police in the 1961 drowning of Bear Van Layer. Vic Hewitt may be formally charged as well, but given the state of his health, it's unlikely he'll serve time. Tonight, at a press conference, Captain La Rochelle will announce the discovery of Bear Van Layer's body. He will also announce that the case has been reopened, with more information forthcoming to the public as soon as he can disclose it. Within a week, she suspects Carl Stoddard's name will be publicly cleared, and his wife, Marianne, can at long last retire from haunting the grounds of the Van Layer Preserve, looking for any evidence that might restore her husband's innocence. The Van Layers, on the other hand, will finally suffer the consequences of their actions. All of these developments should, in theory, give her a feeling of peace, but instead, the feeling she has is that there's more work to do, another whole case to solve, because Barbara Van Layer, or Barbara Van Layer's body, still hasn't been found. In the parking lot at Raybrook, she gets into her Beetle, drives south on the thruway towards Shattuck. These days, she does her best reasoning in her car. The most logical conclusion, she thinks, is that Barbara was killed by John Paul McClellan. All of the evidence points in this direction. The bloody uniform, most damningly, but also the mural, the references Barbara made to an older boyfriend, her nightly excursions up Hunt Mountain, the fingerprints pulled from beer bottles that indicate John Paul had been living there for some time. All of this evidence, Judy feels as if she should be more certain of John Paul's guilt, but something isn't sitting right with her. More than that, Without finding Barbara, alive or otherwise, they still can't make an arrest. And this means that John Paul McClellan will go free. Over and over again, she goes through the pieces of the puzzle, willing a final piece to land in place. But it doesn't, and doesn't. For a while, Judy drives in silence until her stomach rumbles so loudly that she laughs. Last night, she ate dinner in Shattuck's only restaurant, which is more like a bar. At the bottom of the exit off the thruway, she squints into the darkness, looking for the sign. There it is, Driscoll's. Judy, still in her same wrinkled pantsuit from a long day of work, turns right, and then right again into the driveway of Driscoll's pub. Louise, day 6. Put on a shirt, says Louise, a real shirt. By this, she means a shirt with a collar. Her little brother has been wearing the same Led Zeppelin t-shirt, thin from use, for a year. I don't have one of those, says Jessie, so she gives him her own, a white Camp Emerson polo, unisex enough to make him unashamed. I'm taking you out to dinner, says Louise. At Driscoll's, the air is smoky, the atmosphere one of disuse. Several men Louise vaguely recognizes play pool in the middle of a side room. The dining room where Louise and Jessie sit is empty, but for a woman sitting at the bar. Louise hands Jessie a menu. Get anything you want, she says. Jessie regards her. Louise, you know I'm okay. What do you mean? She looks down, touches each corner of the menu, fumbling with it. The waitress, Connie Driscoll, 80 years old if she's a day, comes to take their order. Get a steak if you want, says Louise, but Jessie orders a burger and fries. I'll have a steak, please, Miss Driscoll, says Louise. Medium rare, thank you. Connie Driscoll vanishes into the kitchen, her sneakered footsteps silent on the wall-to-wall carpet that covers the floor. Jessie and Louise fall into silence. What were you saying, says Louise, about being okay? Oh, I don't know, says Jessie. I just know you worry about me, but I'm actually fine. Mom's tough, but I've got friends who look out for me, and half the teachers in my school, they like you and they look out for me because of it. Against her will, Louise smiles. You're welcome, she says. No, I'm serious, says Jessie. I'm fine. I'm almost 12 years old. I can look out for myself. Jessie, come on, says Louise. Well, then let Mom look out for me for a change, he says. Doesn't always have to be you. Louise looks down, unwilling to break the news to him. Their mother will never watch over him, not the way Louise does. No one will. I worry about you too, you know, says Jessie. If you took care of yourself a little better, that would help me out. If you really want to help, I mean. Took care of myself how? Connie Driscoll returns with a Shirley Temple for Jessie, a Coke for Louise. Oh, the house. On the house, she says. He sips. Started dating better guys, he says, for one thing, or no guys, he adds, as an afterthought. Louise nods. It's painful to hear, but it's true. When Louise wonders, did Jessie become the person in front of her? In her mind, she sees the version of her brother who, when tired, used to drape his small body onto hers, place 2 of his own fingers into his mouth. Time, she thinks, from how it does at the preserve. And also, says Jessie, like what? I don't know, Lou. You're really smart. You want. You could go back to Union. On whose dollar? Says Louise. I don't know. Borrow it from a bank. Isn't that what they do? It sounds exhausting. She feels as if she's at the base of a mountain looking up, but she's climbed mountains before. She's run up mountains even. They eat their meal in comfortable silence, listening to the clack of pool balls, the warbly music coming over the speaker system. Connie Driscoll asks them if they'd like anything else, and Louise orders dessert. Why not, she thinks, saved in her bank account to support herself and Jessie for a little while. Tonight, she thinks, she's taking a break from worry, a little respite while she's overhearing. Someone puts a nickel in the jukebox, and the music changes. the Everly Brothers singing about dreams. Then, beneath their clothes' hypnotic harmonies, Louise hears the squeak of a bar stool being pushed backward. The lone woman who's been sitting there stands, digs out her wallet. When she turns, Louise sees that the woman looks familiar, but she can't quite place her. She's wearing a suit with some stains on it. Her hair is short. She looks young, Louise's age or a few years older. She also looks, if not drunk, then like she's deposited 2 beers into a body not used to alcohol. Louise knows before she hears it what the woman will say. Excuse me, but when Louise turns, the woman is looking not at her, but at Jessie. Do you go to Camp Emerson? Says the woman. She's holding a finger in Jesse's direction, pointing to his polo shirt, which bears the camp's green logo. Jessie looks suddenly frightened. No, says Louise, rising, standing in front of him. He doesn't, but I'm a counselor there. The woman turns her gaze toward Louise. I recognize you, she says. Tracy, day 6. Oh, we haven't heard from Tracy in a while. Tracy leans her head against the window of the Stutz Blackhawk. Her father's car is the first she's ever ridden in that has air conditioning. The car he'd had for years prior was a Chevy, a practical 4-door pickup that was also strong enough to tow a horse trailer. She misses the Chevy. More than that, she misses the version of her father that drove the Chevy. The house in Hempstead is exactly as Tracy left it at the start of the summer. Silver front gate, astroturf lawn, artificial flowers in plastic window boxes beneath each of the 2 front windows, and her mother is sitting on the front steps, head high, waiting for the 2 of them to arrive. The Black Hawk roars to a stop in the driveway, and Molly Jewell stands up. Tracy jumps out of the car and runs to her mother, her kind, funny mother, who has always been exactly herself, who makes no attempt to be anyone or anything she isn't. With a jolt, Tracy realizes who she reminds her of. Oh, Tracy, says her mother, I'm so sorry about your friend. It sounds like she meant a lot to you. She does, says Tracy. How? Wonders Tracy, will she ever explain to her mother how her life was changed by a person she knew for 2 months? Her father, having unloaded the car, now clears his throat awkwardly. Good to see you, Molly, he says. She nods. Mhm. He hugs Tracy and then he's gone, leaving Tracy and her mother standing in the driveway with all her things from Camp Emerson. This, she understands, is how things will be for the rest of her childhood. The 2 of them together, the 2 of them alone. She'll see her father again at his wedding to Donna Romano and at holidays where, for each of the 3 years afterward, a new baby half-sibling will appear. She will make conversation, she'll be polite, but they won't be her family, not anymore. The only family she has left stands beside her. Mom, says Tracy, have you ever heard of punk music? No, says her mother. Will you tell me about it? The sky above Hempstead is growing dim. Tracy thinks of Barbara Van Laer, wonders if she's alive, if she's seeing the same sky, 300 miles to the north. She pictures Barbara's strong limbs, her upright, steady head, her skillfulness in water and in woods. She pictures Barbara as she was on the survival trip, building a tent, building a fire, bringing back food for them, keeping everyone alive. And she knows, or believes at least, that Barbara is still in the world. Judita, September 1975. In her Beetle, Judy pulls into the driveway of her parents' home in Schenectady. She sits for a moment, preparing herself. It's a Saturday, and she knows precisely what they'll be doing. Inside, her mother will be vacuuming while her father dusts. Her brothers will be changing light bulbs or doing other odd jobs that their parents have requested of them. It's the same thing they've done every Saturday for as long as she can remember. For years, she would have been working alongside them, folding laundry, making beds. Only this Saturday, Judy is, for the first time, a visitor. A month ago, she moved all of her things out of her childhood bedroom and into a tiny rental a few miles from headquarters at Ray Brook. She had no help doing so. Her father, upon her arrival, had nodded once in her direction and then left the house. Now she gets up out of the car, closes the door. The noise brings her brother, Leonard, to the door. Seeing her, he calls backward into the house. Ma! Judy enters the house, and Leonard hugs her. The sound of the vacuum ceasing. What is it? Her mother calls. Leonard grins. The nation's first has returned. 10 minutes later, all the Luptaks sit at the kitchen table. Her mother has set out tea. Her father, the last to arrive, stirs sugar into his cup, clears his throat. All of them are silent until Leonard says, "We saw your name in the paper again." Judy looks up. "You did?" Leonard nods, stands up from the table, returns with a sheet in his hands, another clipped article from the Times-Union. She takes it into her hands and reads. "Van Layers indicted," reads the headline. Beneath it, a subhead, "Original suspect posthumously cleared." The story continues. Alice Van Layer, who would no doubt have been charged originally with vehicular manslaughter in the death of her son, will go free. The statute of limitations has run out. But Peter's second and third will be charged with criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice. Their ongoing lies to the police about the fate of Bear, including those made in the wake of Barbara's disappearance, make the charge timely. At the moment, they're out on bail, awaiting trial. Their attorney, the journalist notes, will no longer be John Paul McClellan Sr. A picture accompanies the article. In it, the Stoddard family, Marianne, her 3 daughters, her sons-in-law, her grandchildren, stand together, posed formally in front of a neat house in Shattuck, their faces solemn, their posture straight. "Justice restored," reads the caption. Judy hands the article back to her brother, who hands it to his father, who folds it along its original creases and tucks it into his shirt pocket. "Did you see your name?" her father says. "It's right there in the second paragraph." Judy smiles. "I did. I always knew that family did it," says Judy's father. "Back when it happened, everyone knew they had something to do with it. We just didn't know exactly how." "Oh, thank you, Jerry." Judy's mother, who has been silent this whole time, suddenly takes Judy's cup from her, pours her more tea. She is a visitor in their home now, a guest. The realization makes Judy feel proud and sorrowful at the same time. What about the girl, Barbara?" Leonard says. "Any leads there?" "There are, but she can't tell the family about them. Not yet." And so another curtain is drawn between them. "Nothing substantial," she says. On the way back to Ray Brook, Judy watches the pines become taller and denser. She reaches her exit, turns onto 73, climbs up and up in her Beetle. In the car, she lets her mind wander again to the most recent developments in Barbara Van Leer's disappearance. Most interestingly, Annabelle Southworth, Louise's CIT, has come forward with a confession. She was with John Paul McClellan the night of Barbara Van Leer's disappearance, once at 10 p.m. during the community dance, and again in the early hours of the morning. She has provided him with an alibi. Her parents, Catherine and Howard, have verified her story as well. The two families, the Southworths and McClellans, both good friends of the Van Leers, are supportive of the new relationship despite Annabelle's young age. They're very compatible, says Catherine Southworth in her signed affidavit. Oh, thank you again, Jerry. The only other charges they had against John Paul, driving while intoxicated and felony possession of a controlled substance, have been resolved. The bloody clothes, which John Paul maintains were planted, are not admissible as evidence without a charge. He'll do no jail time. Instead, he's been commanded to perform 100 hours of community service work by a judge who seemed to Judy particularly chummy with John Paul's father. Judy is surprised by none of this, only slightly disappointed at the outcome. But since then, there's been something new. Although they may never be able to charge John Paul McClellan with anything related to the disappearance of Barbara Van Leer, they will be able to charge him with something else: second-degree aggravated assault. The victim, Louise Donahue. Oh, thanks just again, Rob. After some discussion with Judy, Louise has agreed to come forward with a complaint. Even better, several people have agreed to testify on Louise's behalf. Judy has done the legwork of tracking down the witnesses who were there in John Paul's shared house near Union College the night of the attack. His roommate, Stephen, along with 3 girls, Stephen named as guests of theirs on that occasion. She thinks of the boys she went to high school with, the girls too. Would they have been so brave? She isn't certain, but it's 1975 now, she tells herself. The world has changed. So what's your theory? Her brother had asked at the kitchen table. If you can't give us any new details, give us your hunch. About? Barbara Van Leer, said her brother. And to her right, her mother had made the sign of the cross. That poor child, she muttered lowly. Judy looked out the window. I think she's all right, actually, says Judy. Leonard furrowed his brow. How do you know? I don't know. I just have a feeling, said Judy. The night she ran into Louise said one thing that has echoed in for weeks. On a whim, Judy had asked Louise about TJ Hewitt because, despite her belief in TJ's innocence, she could never shake the story that the boy, Christopher, told her. Why on earth, thought Judy, was Barbara going into TJ Hewitt's tent at night? What could she have been doing there, aside from something incorrect? And so, with 2 beers in her belly and her inhibitions lowered, she floated the idea to Louise Donahue, making sure she was out of earshot of her brother before she did. Louise laughed. What? Said Judy. There's no way, said Louise. Why? A lot of people think TJ's strange, said Louise, but she's harmless. She's better than harmless. She's a good person. All she wants to do is hunt and fish and be alone. Her family's got a place on an island up north. I think she'd move there now if she could. Louise flung down, ordered a beer for herself. She just needs money, said Louise. Judy watched her. Where exactly, she said. Louise furrowed her brow. Where's what? The island, the house. Oh, I don't know the name of it, said Louise, but she's got a map of it on the wall of the director's cabin. Last time I looked, there was a pin where the cabin is. She drank again, and then, slowly, she looked up at Judy, realizing it could be career making for Judy. Finding Barbara Van Laer, finding her alive, no less, would mean a promotion, maybe two. It would set her on a path for success, and it would resolve the question that's hovered over her head since she began her work as an investigator, the one that every male investigator she has encountered has thought upon seeing her. Are women cut out for this work? Captain La Rochelle, she knows, would find Barbara if he could. Every investigator would. But none of them would take into account Barbara's preferences or her safety. Instead, they'd sacrifice Barbara's well being to better their own lot in life. This, in fact, is what Captain La Rochelle did do in a way when Bear Van Laer disappeared and when Carl Stoddard became a convenient suspect. He let Stoddard, a voiceless in death, take the fall, while La Rochelle took the promotion that came with a closed case. Judy disagrees with many of the things her parents taught her, but one thing she respects them for is this: their belief in putting others before themselves. If Barbara Van Laer has chosen to hide in the woods of her own volition, if she is safe and protected and fed and self-reliant, who is Judy to drag her back into the world she abandoned? Still, she wants to be certain that her theory is correct. And so, from her small apartment in Ray Brook, she makes plans. She'll go back to the Van Laer Preserve. She'll go back to the director's cabin where she spent so many hours. Her guess is that it will be abandoned. The Hewitts, after all, have cut ties with the Van Laers. She'll open the door, which has never had a lock. She'll pray that the map is still tacked to the wall. If it is, she'll make a note of the spot that a pin or pinhole marks, the site of the Hewitt family's cabin, way up north in the middle of the high peaks of the Adirondacks. Barbara, day one. The bed is empty. In the moonlight, in the threshold of the cabin called Balsam, Barbara Van Laer takes a last look over her shoulder, saying goodbye in her mind to Tracy, to her bunkmates, to Camp Emerson. She's leaving later than she'd agreed upon with TJ, who'll be pacing her cabin, buzzing with nerves. But Barbara's counselor stayed out much later than she'd predicted. She had to wait for them to return, one after another, and then wait some more until the sound of their movements quieted, until the sound of their breathing steadied. Then she stood up, as silently as she could, and tiptoed to the doorway, where she now stands. Her bag, she's forgotten the paper bag she brought back from the main house, the one that almost gave her away. What's in the bag? Tracy had asked her last week when she pretended not to understand. Outside, the air is fresh, the moon so bright that she doesn't need the flashlight she brought along. Her other things are waiting for her in TJ's cabin. Her backpack loaded with fresh food that should hold her for a week at least, her warm clothes, her hiking boots into which she'll change as quickly as she can. Sure enough, when she steps onto the porch of the director's cabin, the door opens swiftly. There is TJ, checking her watch. It's almost 3 a.m, says TJ. They'll barely make it. Should we wait a day, says Barbara, but TJ shakes her head fast. Tonight's the last night of the party up at the hill. It's tonight, while the guests are on the grounds, or never. And never means being sent away to Elon in the fall. Never means not seeing TJ or Vic, her true family, for years. In silence, they walk to TJ's truck, a canoe strapped to its roof. As quietly as possible, They close both doors. Then TJ starts the truck, and it rumbles up the hill, past Self-Reliance on its right, past the parking lot full of cars. Were you able to get into it? Asked Barbara, gesturing toward John Paul McClellan's blue Trans Am. TJ nods. Clothes are in the trunk now, she says. He won't see them, but the police will when they search it. Why will they search it? TJ grins. That's not all I planted in the car, she says. When he's apprehended, they'll have probable cause to form a search. Once they reach the thruway, they continue for an hour. TJ drives as fast as she can without risking the attention of the police. 9 miles over the speed limit exactly. She glances up at the sky as she drives, which is lightening with every minute that passes. On the way, TJ quizzes her. What do you do about water? She asks. Build a fire, boil it, use iodine. What do you do if you're sick? Use the medical guidebook you've put on the shelf. Look for medicine in the cabinet. The same instructions they've been over and over again. During the nightly training sessions TJ's been giving Barbara all summer. Preparation for life in the woods. Not forever, just in she'll be legally allowed to make her own decisions. She can do as she pleases without fear of her parents imposing their rules or their punishments. If at any point she changes her mind, all she has to do is emerge. It's Barbara's decision completely, TJ says. Barbara glances at TJ, taking in the contours of her profile, her kind face. When Barbara was a baby, a small child, it was TJ who tended to her the most. TJ who helped her and taught her. The word motherly is not one that applies to TJ Hewitt, and yet TJ is the only mother that Barbara has ever known. Her own, though living, has been unreachable for all of Barbara's life, a walking shell. Tea in your pack, says TJ, the kind you like, some chocolate too for a treat at night. Then, will you have enough to read? Barbara nods. I will, she says. And all right, if I run out, I'll be able to come to you soon, says TJ. In a month or two. I just have to be certain I'm not being followed. She glances at Barbara, pats her knee. I know you can make it until then. Can, says Barbara, reassuring TJ. As much as herself, but in truth, she does feel ready. TJ has made her so. All her training, every night, all of their preparations they made. The one thing she'll miss is music. This she has had to leave behind. Both of them fall into silence again, and then, just before the sun rises, TJ pulls off the highway. 2 headlamps light their way as they dismount the canoe from the roof, and then portage it for a half-mile through the woods. TJ, Barbara knows, is growing nervous. The whole plan will fail if she isn't back on the grounds of Camp Emerson before the rest of the staff wakes up. And so Barbara picks up her pace, despite the fact that her lungs are burning, despite the fact that the backpack she carries is weighing her down. We're almost there, says TJ, again and again. The sun is rising as the 2 of them row quietly over the surface of the lake, toward an island in its middle. As they approach, Barbara can see, just beyond the tree line, the flat surface of a man-made structure. Remember there's deer here, says TJ, climbing out of the stern of the canoe and onto the shore. You can always hunt for deer. There's 2 guns in the house and plenty of shot. Barbara has a sudden flash of her own mother following her, ghost-like about the house, admonishing her not to eat so much, the opposite, always, of TJ, who throughout her life has fed her every chance she got, even coming to Barbara's school from time to time to hand-deliver coats and clothing and other treats that she knew Barbara liked. She used to sneak in and out a window to do so. It was never a problem until the one time she was seen by the house mother from behind, and Barbara, flustered in a panic, said that TJ had been a teenage boy. From there, things went terribly wrong. I'll remember, says Barbara, now. I remember everything you taught me. They've reached their destination. For a moment, the two of them regard each other. Go, says Barbara. You'll be fine, says TJ. I'll be fine, says Barbara. Now, Barbara stands at the shore of the island, watching TJ move away in her canoe. She waits until she can't hear the dip of the paddle into the lake, until TJ disappears. At last, into the forest on the other side, turning back with one last wave before she goes. Barbara closes her eyes. She listens, waiting for a sign, and a hermit thrush answers with its beautiful song. She walks to the cabin that the Hewitts built many generations prior. Inside, it's cool and shadowy and stocked with the supplies that TJ has been ferrying over for months in anticipation of her stay. Something new is in the corner, an acoustic guitar, a beginner's instruction book. Away, Barbara realizes for her to make her own music. She sets her heavy pack down gratefully on the ground. At the top is the paper bag she brought with her from Self-Reliance. She opens it, pulls out the one non-essential object she permitted herself to transport today. It's a framed picture of her brother, Bear. He, too, will have a home here. She sets the picture on the rough table at which she'll eat her meals. You're safe now, she tells her brother in her mind. Judita, September 1975, and this is the last chapter, and it's short. At the edge of a lake 50 miles north of the Van Laer Preserve, Judy Luptak stands with her hands on her hips, squinting toward an island in the distance. She has brought no boat with her. She's trying to estimate the distance between the shore and the island, half a mile, maybe slightly more. She's never been a strong swimmer, but she takes off in her shoes and dips a toe in nonetheless, testing the water. It's freezing. For a moment, Judy rethinks her decision. She has no evidence that she'll find anything on the other side. It's a Saturday, her day off. She could go home, back to her rental in Ray Brook. She could go to the grocery store and buy food for dinner. Already, she's learning the names of the people in the town. She could be doing anything she wants. Instead, pulled by a hunch that she hasn't been able to shake ever since she spoke to Louise Donahue, she strips down to her bathing suit, plunges into the cold water before her. She has no idea how long the swim will take her. You can always float, she tells herself. If you get tired, you can float. As she swims, she thinks if she's right in her theory, if she is right, which means remains to be seen, she can understand the logic at every step. The bloody uniform that resulted from what Christopher Moldauer described as Barbara's accident on the survival trip, the sudden realization for TJ and Barbara of how useful it might be. Planting those clothes in John Paul McClellan's trunk would serve a dual purpose. Not only would they throw investigators off the scent of where Barbara had really gone, but they would function as a neat form of justice. Justice for Louise Donahue, who had once gone to TJ with fresh injuries inflicted on her by John Paul. Justice for Carl Stoddard, who was himself framed after death by two families, the McClellans and the Van Laers, who wished to preserve their good reputations to avoid a scandal at the expense of an innocent man. Justice, too, for T.J. Hewitt's own father, who had entered into the sort of agreement that went against his own set of ethics, reduced him to something no better than the Van Laers themselves. With two simple actions, revealing the truth about Bear and helping Barbara to hide, the Hewitts retraced their steps to their last wrong turn, taking a different path instead. It's difficult to know how much time has elapsed since Judy left the opposite shore. Sometimes she takes her own advice and floats, looking straight up into the blue September sky. She closes her eyes, lets herself be cradled by the water, then goes on. At some point, the shore in front of her is closer than the shore behind. She stops, treads water. If she swims, she thinks she can see a trail of smoke rising into the sky, as if from a chimney. At last, she makes land, and in the near distance, she sees a figure peer out from behind a tree. Barbara Van Laer. Judy would recognize her anywhere, though she's never seen her in the flesh. From the water, Judy raises a hand in the air. Tentatively, Barbara won't know who Judy is. Gone long before the state police descended on the grounds, Judy has the feeling of looking through a one-way mirror, knowing far more about Barbara than Barbara understands. In her bathing suit, trembling with cold, Judy must look slightly ridiculous, amateurish, an especially adventurous hiker or camper who didn't expect to be seen. Across from her, Barbara stands still, both hands at her sides. Are you all right? Judy calls out. Yes, Barbara says. Then are you? Judy nods. Do you want me to leave you alone? Says Judy. For an instant, Barbara hesitates. Then she says with finality, yes. The swim back feels longer and slower than the swim there. Judy is so cold that her teeth clack. Still, 50 feet into her journey, she pauses, turns back toward the island to take a last look. There she is, Barbara Van Laer, standing straight and strong, at home in her body, at home in the woods. Something about her looks immortal, thinks Judy. A spirit, an apparition, more god than child. Judy keeps swimming until, at last, she reaches the opposite shore. When she looks back into the island, she sees only the pines, drawn close like a curtain around the girl. And that is the end. I think there's some acknowledgments. Oh, you shut up. Stop leaning your feet. It's annoying. I know what should be acknowledging too. How many pages did we do? In 2 weeks, 10 days. 558. Oh, geographers, authors of a lot of different publications about the Adirondacks. Some friends. This is the author. Let me know if you like this, because maybe books this weekend or tonight. Maybe we'll see. Okay, so well, maybe I should have known that pink paint going over. I like that. They threw me off. There was a red herring there about that she had an older boyfriend, because it was a setup from the beginning, even writing the initials on the wall. It was all a setup. Clever. All right. I have to pee. I love you so much. Call me tomorrow. I was able to get a couple more bags. I'm gonna keep going. It's about all I could do with depression, but I'm working on it.